My favorite radio show growing up was called Nocturnal Emissions, and it was hosted by a guy named Oedipus, who was the program director of WBCN, which was a really cool AOR radio station in Boston. And he had this very edgy show. It's the first place I heard Brian Eno, all these artists I had never been exposed to that weren't on classic rock stations, that weren't on top 40 stations. And I ended up working with him years later. I ended up producing and writing a radio show that went out to 50 commercial stations that he was my host. So I ended up working with him like a decade and a half later.
So what took you from the radio to actually playing to live sets, being a DJ? Was there someone in your life that you were inspired by?
Yes, well, so I was on the radio, and then I started going to David Mancuso's loft parties, and I started to hear this whole other kind of music I hadn't really been exposed to on a deep level. I had been out to loads of clubs and stuff, but it was never anything that inspired me to dance, but not to collect. And that's a very big difference. I mean, I was running up to friends saying, what is this record? What is this record? What is this record? I need to have this. I need to find out more about this music. I must play this music. And then I started a radio show that reflected that. It was called Soul School. And it was like a combination of loft classics, Paradise Garage classics, some house as well. It was about 1991, 92. And it was from there that I started getting gigs. The first place I was asked to play were by listeners, and I was invited to play the African Street Festival in Brooklyn in 1992, you know, and as the white girl shows up, you know, and that was my first gig outside the radio station. There was a proper one. I mean, there was other ones that I had played with, you know, as part of WNYU. You know, when I was in the 80s, I played at Mars and a few other places, CBGB's Record Canteen, but it wasn't the same kind of a thing. It was more indie. It wasn't the same kind of club DJ thing. But yeah, that's where it kind of all started. It was just people then just started asking me. You know, David asked me to play, Francois asked me to play, different people asked me to play. And I started playing local kind of lounges and stuff too.
So what drives you as an artist now? Like, what do you want people to, when they come to listen to you, is there something you want people to feel? Like, obviously as a selector, a DJ, you want people to feel something. Like, how do you want people to feel? Is there something that you think, I want people to feel this on this particular set, or at this festival I want them to feel this, or do you read it as you go? Like, what do you want? What's the philosophy that drives you?
Well, every musical situation is different. So, for instance, a classic album Sunday session, it might be very intense. It might be very melancholic. You know, if you're doing Pink Floyd, Wish You Were Here, I've had people break down in tears. So that's a different expression.
One of your classic albums.
There you go. I broke down in tears to some of my classic album Sunday sessions too, especially when it's Joni Mitchell, Little Green. I'm like, oh my gosh, I just always cry. So music can make us. Music can not control, but it can drive our emotions in so many different ways. So for instance, a festival, I don't want to make people cry, right? I want to uplift people. I want people to have a good time. On the radio, it's a different thing. I don't need to make people dance. And it depends on what time of day it is. So if it's the morning, I might start out more mellow. If it's a Friday night, you're not going to be playing ambient music, you're going to be playing more uplifting music. So every situation has a context. So every musical journey will be dictated by that context and what you're trying to achieve. So I want people to feel emotion. Now that emotion can be uplifting, it can be melancholic, it can be reflective, it can be transcendental. But I also, on the other side of things, especially with the radio shows and with Classic Album Sundays, is I also like to educate people about the stories behind music and how it all comes together. I don't necessarily do that in the club dance floor, like, okay, everybody, let me just tell you about the producer on this one. Yeah, exactly. It's not like, so it's a different thing. A club thing is to make people dance. And of course, also to champion new records as well. I mean, every DJ loves to champion new records, unless you only play old stuff.